Hello everyone. Today I'm gonna be giving my first impressions of the Royal Navy Tier 10 destroyer, the Daring. The first thing you might notice is that it's so horrendously slow. Even with a speed flag, it only does 36.8 knots. It's the slowest of all Tier 10 DDs. Even the gearing does 37.8 and it can even add speed boost on top, which of course makes it significantly faster. Considering one of the main hunting targets for the Daring is the Shima, which does 41 knots even without the speed boost, just with the speed flag, it's obvious that if an enemy DD really wants to run, you won't catch it. However, the concealment on the Daring is amazing. At 5.7 kilometers, meaning even the stealthy Shimakaze with a 5.6 km concealment only gets a brief warning before you pop up in his face, and once you pop up in his face, he's in for a very rough time. The Hydra on the ship lasts an impressive 3 minutes, but it's very short range. You can barely use it to spot others since you only got 3.9 km ship spotting. But when it comes to forcing close range knife fights, it's worth its weight in gold, as it allows you to always get a comfortable warning of any incoming torpedoes. This makes pretty much all knife fights into pure gun battles, and that's exactly what you want in the Daring, because your gun power is your defining trait. So forcing these pure gun battles is the best thing for you. This ship has three turrets with 214mm guns each. Now, it's obvious from the get-go that 114mm guns won't have any pens because, well, you divide it by 6 and you end up with potato penetration. So you have to slot IFHE on them. So that's always something I dislike, being forced to slot IFHE on a destroyer. It's always going to be an annoying point sink because it means you have to sacrifice some other utility. In the case of the Daring, I gave up RPF because it has that convenient early torpedo warning system, but still having to give up such a valuable perk is always going to be a significant trade-off. However, when you do have that IFHE on the ship, you're treated to a real DPM monster. The reload on the gun sits at a very comfortable 2.5 seconds with a 1.7k HE alpha per shell. This means your DPM is a very impressive 244k compared to Gearing's 216,000. Now, Gearing shells deal 100 more damage per hit, they're 1.8 compared to your 1.7k, but the Gearing has a reload of 3 seconds, whereas you have a 2.5. Another, of course, very important thing to note is that your fire chance is significantly higher. So when you build around these guns, as I've made here, you can get some very powerful results. In this case, I slapped the 3 million reload module on the ship. I added both VFT and Demolition Expert on it. And this of course means that I have a ridiculous 10% fire chance with the flags on a guns that reload in 2 seconds. This means that you almost inevitably start fires when whaling on enemy battleships. In fact, I often felt like I was a mini Atlanta in this thing. When you run into other DDs, even if it's not you spotting but someone else spotting, and you start giving support fire, the raw firepower is just disgusting. When it comes to direct 1 versus 1s, with the help of the Hydro, once again giving you that, forcing it into a pure gun battle, and the concealment allowing you to pretty much always get the jump, it's very easy to take pretty much any engagement, and that is absolutely a significant strength to have in a destroyer. The AAP on the ship is also no slouch whatsoever, even though one might expect it considering the smaller caliber. In this example, a Donskoy reverses out behind an island, and he pops radar. If you look at the top right, you see I have 12k damage dealt at this point. And I just start shooting right back. I mean, if you're gonna radar and basically give me broadside, I'm gonna shoot right back. And this raw APM DPM with this pure gunboat build, just enhancing these strengths, means that the actual damage you pump out in return against these cruisers is actually pretty damn disgusting. And this Donskoy is quickly realizing that, hold on, wait a minute, this wasn't the fight I wanted. The range, of course, is also very impressive. 13.8 kilometers range. This is better than all the competition. Even the Kaba with AFT has 13.5, and this thing without AFT has 13.8. Oh, and you notice that if you look at the top right now, I suddenly have 30k damage. So I actually, in that short, brief period of time, I did 18,000 raw AP damage to that Donsko who tried to, well, he tried to harass me, but he ended up with the reverse happening to him, which was probably a pretty nasty surprise. The daring torpedoes, however, are not quite as impressive. The first thing you might notice here is that the firing angles are absolutely dreadful. You have to practically give full broadside. However, you do have the unique Royal Navy trait of being able to launch single torpedoes at a time, which does give you some very unique opportunities. For example, in this case, I expect the Baltimore to push in, so I create an extremely narrow spread that even nose-in cruisers will struggle to dodge. So the ability to create these super narrow spreads is an obvious significant advantage. However, they are still quite limited. They're limited on range. You only have 10 km torpedo range. Considering the ship itself is already so slow, pushing into effective torpedo range often means pushing into a lot of radars as well. So they do come with a significant risk if you want to be effective with them. The 2-minute torpedo reload time isn't going to win any prizes either. But they are very stealthy in return. They have a 1.3 km concealment range, which is even better than Gearing's 1.4. However, they are slower. They only do 62 knots. Gearing's torps do 66, Yu Yang do 68. So doing 62 isn't very impressive. They also do less damage at 16.8k a pop, whereas Yu Yang does almost 18k, and if you run the Fletcher torp on the Gearing, you do 19k a pop. So pretty obvious downgrades here. However, with this unique Royal Navy trait, you are able to create these super narrow spreads, as you see here. That Montana isn't expecting this super narrow spread to come through the gap, and suddenly he pretty much healthy battleship ends up eating 4 torps in a super narrow spread, and of course you combine this torpedo power of getting these massive hits, and then you add Daring's incredible firepower, which I mentioned earlier, combined with that high fire chance which I mentioned earlier, and you have a battleship that was just quite healthy and happy to suddenly a barbecued and quite dead battleship. So these torps do work very well in synergy with the current setup that the Daring has, and it can be quite frustrating for the enemy team to deal with. However, as of right now, there are only 2 options. You can only fire either single torpedoes or widespread torpedoes, and this is obviously garbage. This used to be in the they did this in the past. I think it was on UK cruisers had that same thing, and then the community complained and they changed it. So we're hoping they're gonna do the same thing now as well, because you do end up in a lot of stupid situations where you see an enemy ship coming around a corner and you just want to you just want to fire basically 2 narrow spreads at them, but you can't. So and widespread is garbage, so you end up having to individually fire all 10 torpedoes one by one, even though you want to do it quickly because you want to like smoke up and start shooting or something, or you want to disengage. Regardless, Wargaming, get rid of this stupid widespread and just give us single and narrow. If someone really wants to use widespread, they can individually launch them all across the sun, and they'll get their super widespread and everyone will be happy. So please keep that away from please fix that issue. The AA, it's quite decent, but you have no defensive AA to bolster it, so it won't do shit against high tier carriers. Combined, of course, with the slightly lower rudder shift, slightly worse rudder shift that this ship has, and with the significantly slower speed, and you're obviously going to be a juicy carrier target. There's really no way around that. You are always going to be something juicy for carriers to go for. So that's kind of plays into the fact that this is a very defensive destroyer. It's not designed for going for those wide flanking maneuvers or harassment. It plays with the fleet, it screens for the fleet. Ultimately, I'd probably optimize my current build a bit more, probably trade maybe BFT for Survivability Expert, as the ship has a pretty damn comfortable health pool of 20.8k even without the Captain perk. The ship seems quite strong though. Its playstyle is more oriented around a screening defensive DD. You happily take knife fights with other DDs and you look for opportunities to smoke up or sail behind cover to harass enemy capital ships with the raw DPM. And of course, combined with the fire chance and the great range, this is not really that hard to do. Narrow spread torps make it hard for enemies to push into you. Enemy DDs will curse you, as your constant hydro screen will spot torps left, right, and picking a fight with your gunpower and 5.7 km concealment is always going to be rough for them. On the other hand, flanking and aggressive maneuvers are iffy, because you're so slow and you sit quite high in the water. I did try open water gunboating briefly, but it remained very brief indeed. With carriers around, you have to play even more defensive, as you lack any real tools of dealing with them. You can't defend against their drops, and if they spot you, any enemy DD can pretty much hunt you down because you are so slow. I do consider the ship quite strong though, and I think it's overall actually pretty well balanced. The one ship, however, that will suffer the absolute most from the daring being added to the game is the Shimakaze. The comparable concealment means that you, as a Shimakaze, you have no real way of avoiding an engagement with the daring. Even with Hydra pointing his way, it only gives you direction. And the Hydra means that your torps will practically never land on the daring or any targets behind it. And even if you're faster than the daring, the raw DPM of the daring will shred you. Because of the render delay, he'll spot you, you'll spot him, you turn away, but by the time you've turned away and actually gotten undetected, he will probably have shredded half your health. So the Shimakaze is already in a pretty damn shitty position, and I'm a bit worried that adding the daring to the game will make that position even worse. Still though, that remains to be seen, and this is of course still a work in progress, so we don't know what's going to change. Anyway, that was my brief impressions of the daring. I hope you guys enjoyed it.